Hey everyone, so a lot of you who have been following the channel for a while and subscribe and follow along with like the in-field adventures and when we go out together and photograph different things and go through tips on how to photograph different landscapes. If you want to follow along with those and you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to this channel so you can follow along with those. You've been commenting under the videos and I've seen a lot of those comments roll in, and you've noticed that I did buy a new camera. I bought a Sony a7R II and I've been using a Tamron 17-28 f2.8 lens with it. And I've really liked it so far. But for the past 5 years, what I've been using is this camera with a different wide angle lens and then this 70-200 f4 lens from Sony. And this is the Sony a6000 camera. And I've been, like I said, been using it for 5 straight years, and it's really provided me with a lot of opportunities to photograph some of the most beautiful scenes that I've ever seen in my entire life. And a lot of people are surprised when I tell them that I photograph primarily with the Sony a6000. That is until I bought the a7R II that I've been using for the past few months. But in this video, I didn't want to talk just about my camera gear. What I wanted to do was talk with you about when should you buy a new camera. And it's a big question that a lot of landscape photographers have, especially when it comes to the amount of money that you have to spend when you do buy a new camera. You know, we can't all buy the newest, latest, and greatest technology that comes out every single year. We really have to plan out and know when is the actual right time to buy what camera. And in this video, I'm gonna go through some of the tips that I go for whenever I'm purchasing new gear, because like I said, I've been using this camera for 5 straight years. I don't really buy new cameras all that much. Now, I did buy a new a6000 a couple years back because one of the back screens broke on mine, because I'm very poor about taking care of my photography gear and honestly letting it fall down several times whenever I am out shooting. But I bought a new a6000 instead of going for something like this a7R II, a full frame camera that you can get too. And I wanted to get the a6000 again because I was familiar with it, I was comfortable with it, and it came at a very low price point. And at that time, in an emergency situation where the camera broke, that was the right route to take. Sometimes that is the route right to take on buying a new camera, you know, going for that lower priced option and not going over budget on spending something at an astronomical price that you can't afford, that you have to finance the camera, or that you have to borrow anything for a camera too. I don't want you to borrow any money for a camera. I don't want you to finance a camera. I want you to be able to buy a camera outright using these guidelines. And it really comes down to the one question that I always ask whenever I am buying new camera gear, especially a new camera body, and that is my current camera holding me back from what I want to do with my landscape photography? Let me say that again. Is my current camera holding me back from what I want to do in landscape photography? And for the a6000, it was holding me back. It started acting up when I was in Kenya photographing on safari. You know, it made me lose out on a couple photographs that I wish I would have gotten. Had I gotten them and gotten the opportunity to take those photos, I may have come back with one more photo to add to my portfolio. So with it acting up and with the technology that went into it, I was held back with what I was trying to do. So I decided it was time to try something new, and that's why I went full frame and got the a7R II. So is your camera holding you back from what you want to do in landscape photography? And that can be a lot of different things. It can be things like, are you making big prints? Are you being held back in the size of prints that you want to make? Are you trying to do different things like time-lapse photography? Do you want an intervalometer built into your camera? Are your lenses holding you back? Do you want to completely switch your camera maker from something like Nikon to Canon, or from Canon to Sony, Sony to Fuji? All these things are things to consider when you yourself are thinking about what type of photography you like to shoot. that can be different for every single person. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly what you need to do when you are purchasing a camera, because you're the only person who knows what their style is and what you want to succeed in landscape photography in the first place. So mine was the size of my files was holding me back in what I was doing in post-processing. The image noise was holding me back because I do a lot of night photography too. So I wanted a camera that provided better image noise. But again, I spent 5 years waiting to make that change. Making do with this camera, knowing and learning everything that it can do to make do at the time before switching over to a more expensive option, and I wasn't overwhelmed with all of those features that came with the camera originally. Now, I have like these 3 guidelines that I guess I always go through when I am buying a new camera or a new piece of photography equipment, maybe like a lens or something like that. So I did want to break these 3 guidelines down. Now, the first guideline is don't buy a new camera every single time they come out with a new one every year. You know, after the A7R II came out, they came out with the A7R III, A7R4, you have the AS models that come out. You have so many options, and every year they up the ante. They provide one little extra feature every single time they make a new camera. And they tout that, you know, marketers are good at their job and they sell those cameras at a very high price. So is that juice worth the squeeze? Are you going to spend that amount of money for that one little extra feature, that one little extra tweak that they put into the camera to make it that much better? Oftentimes when they make new releases of cameras, they add that extra feature just to sell a new model. Sometimes they completely revamp the model and it is worth the money that you spend on the camera. So you really have to look at what's packed into the camera. Go through the specs list. Is the A7R II worth it, or should you buy the A7R4? Should you buy the XT4 or the XT3, or in future years, the XT5, 6, something like that from Fuji? You know, oftentimes the previous models are going to be just as good as the other models. Then spending that money and losing out on that amount of financial peace that you have when you are buying photography equipment. So I always ask myself, what do the specs tell me here? Not what does the flashy marketing tell me? What do the specs tell me? Is this camera worth the money? Oftentimes, the answer is no. And photography companies don't want me to tell you that. Ultimately, they want me to partner with them to tell you to buy their new equipment. I only buy the equipment that I think is worth the cash that I shell out for it. Now, if you do want to completely ignore that piece of advice and you are going to buy a new camera every single year, my advice to you would be not to keep the old camera bodies. Whenever they do come out with a new camera and you want to buy it, sell your old camera body and put that money towards the new camera body so that you're only spending a portion of what you would have spent having just bought a whole new camera. So really think about the finance part of buying a new camera. My second guideline is put a little bit of money away. Be diligent and smart in saving for this piece of gear. And when you do have enough money and you have been saving for that camera and you have made that diligent process, go ahead and buy it. You know, we go through the process of saving and then buying whether you have the money or not. I want to encourage you to be diligent and put a little bit of money aside each month. Make a small budget category, if you will. Put $10 here, $20, $50, however much you feel comfortable putting money into that small little savings account that you have, and then buying the camera when you have the money. Oftentimes, if you're diligent about it and you work towards that goal, you're going to get there faster than you think. It goes back to being financially responsible when you wanted something like a new dog or a new baseball glove. You put a little bit of money in a Folgers can, a coffee can, or a piggy bank, and you slowly saved up for what you wanted to buy. I don't know where we got away from that, but somehow we did. So put a little bit of money away each month and save up for your new piece of photography equipment. And number 3, do your research and really be sure what you're buying is worth the money. Really be sure, like I said earlier, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are they putting enough into the camera to make it worth the buy? Is that camera better than an older model? You know, when I was doing research on whether or not to buy the Sony a7R II, I was researching it versus the a7R IV. Obviously, the A4 at this point in time is the higher priced option, and this goes within to the future as well. If you are watching this and they've come out with new A7R models, the guidelines stay the same. So you have to think about, is that new camera that much better than the older model? When you put up the specs side by side of the a7R II and the a7R IV, they're really not that much different. When you look at the image quality, they're not that much different. There may be one small improvement here or there, but is that worth spending an extra $2,000 to get? In my mind, it's not that much different in the long run to save that money and tweak those things in post-processing or making do with what you have here, a newer camera that's in your arsenal. You know, when you get a new camera, you ultimately want to learn everything about it, and you want to use the technology that you spent the money for to create better photos. So I think using what you have when you can and using that to its full advantage far outweighs spending something that's $2,000 more expensive and ultimately not having enough money to travel to those places. And that leads me to a bonus guideline here. How much do you want to spend on travel versus your new camera? If you want to take more trips, go ahead and use the camera you have. Don't buy a new one. Use the money that you would have spent on a camera to go to new places. Half the time you're gonna come back with better photos than if you bought a new camera and sat at home or shot places around your home. So really do the thinking and the diligence about, where am I gonna go and where am I gonna be able to go if I do buy a new camera? And is it worth that drop in money, that opportunity cost, to stay at home and hold my new camera, or should I use my old camera and go shoot in locations that I want to go to? Use all these guidelines to think about when you should buy a new camera. I think that once you go through these steps and then think about that one initial question of, is my current camera really holding me back so much that I can't produce the images that I want to as a landscape photographer? Half the time you're probably going to keep the camera that you already have. Again, camera companies don't want me to tell you that, but that's the honest truth of it. So take it from my experience of 10 years of only using 2 cameras in my entire time as a professional landscape photographer, of knowing when to buy a new camera, how to buy that, and the guidelines and principles that go along with spending the money to getting a new camera.